In today's rapidly changing world, a significant and often overlooked phenomenon is happening. Spiritually awakened individuals are quietly withdrawing from mainstream society. This exodus is not due to anger, rebellion, or frustration. Rather, it's an essential part of psychological growth, as predicted by Carl Jung. Jung's concept of the necessary withdrawal explains why individuals who reach a high level of psychological development often find it impossible to continue participating in the collective unconsciousness of society. Jung observed that as people become more conscious, the more difficult it becomes to engage with the societal norms and structures around them. This isn't merely a metaphorical discomfort, it's somatic. The collective unconscious, made up of shared delusions, projections, and unresolved psychological issues, becomes physically painful to those who awaken. For the spiritually conscious, being in this environment feels like navigating through a storm of projections and repressed emotions that society, as a whole, refuses to acknowledge. The collective unconscious is essentially a shared set of beliefs, fears, and projections that bind people together. Society operates on these unconscious agreements, and it works only as long as everyone participates without questioning. When someone becomes awake, truly awake, not just intellectually but also psychologically, they begin to see through these projections. They witness the shadows that society is desperately trying to avoid, and they realize that many of the social conflicts around them are simply collective shadow projections. The political divisions, the outrage on social media, and the divisions in society all stem from this inability to confront and integrate the darkness within. This realization leads to a profound shift in how the awakened person perceives the world. Every interaction becomes a challenge. They are surrounded by individuals who are unaware of the deeper truths that lie beneath the surface of social exchanges. As Jung experienced personally, he found it increasingly unbearable to interact with others in a way that required him to pretend not to see what he saw or to ignore the unconscious material influencing their behavior. The more conscious a person becomes, the harder it becomes to stay engaged in the collective unconsciousness. Ultimately, the need to withdraw is not a rejection of society, but a necessity for survival. Those who are awakening realize that to maintain their consciousness, they must retreat. They need solitude to preserve their sense of self and to process what they have become aware of. Jung's work offers profound insights into why this process is not only inevitable for the spiritually awakened, but also essential for their well-being. The necessary withdrawal is a step on the path to individuation, the process of becoming one's true, authentic self, and ultimately contributing to society in a way that aligns with one's higher consciousness. When individuals begin their spiritual awakening, they often experience a profound shift in perception. The more they awaken to deeper truths, the more they find themselves at odds with the unconscious, shadow-driven society that surrounds them. This shift is neither sudden nor dramatic. It is a gradual, almost imperceptible process. But for those who experience it, the consequences are both profound and unavoidable. Carl Jung's concept of the necessary withdrawal highlights this process, explaining that as a person becomes increasingly conscious, the pressure to remain in the collective unconscious society becomes not only unsustainable, but psychologically painful. The collective unconsciousness and society's shadows. Society, in many ways, operates on a shared set of unconscious agreements, unspoken rules, collective delusions, projections, and fears that bind people together. Jung referred to this as the collective unconscious, a term that describes the deep-seated, often unacknowledged psychological patterns that influence human behavior. These patterns are passed down through generations, shaping societal norms, cultural values, and political ideologies. Most people live their lives participating in this unconscious system, unaware of its profound influence on their thoughts and actions. However, when an individual becomes awakened, when they become more psychologically conscious, they begin to see through the veil of these collective illusions. They recognize the projections that others are unconsciously living out and can identify the repressed shadows of society. These shadows are the aspects of human nature that are denied or suppressed by the collective: fear, anger, greed, and other darker impulses that are often pushed out of sight. When this realization occurs, it can be overwhelming. The awakened individual becomes acutely aware of the way society functions, how it thrives on denial, projection, and avoidance. They see how conflicts, whether political, social, or personal, are often the result of people projecting their unresolved psychological issues onto others. This projection is what Jung described as the shadow. For instance, the societal tendency to scapegoat certain groups, be it political parties, social classes, or racial groups, stems from the collective unconscious, a mass projection of the darkness that people refuse to confront within themselves. These external conflicts are simply reflections of the internal dissonance of the collective psyche. As the awakened individual gains insight into this dynamic, they find it increasingly impossible to remain engaged in such interactions. The very essence of social conflict becomes unbearable to witness, let alone participate in. Jung himself experienced this personal dissonance as he advanced in his own spiritual journey. He found that normal social interactions became increasingly difficult because they demanded that he ignore or suppress his deeper awareness. Every conversation seemed to involve participating in collective illusions, pretending not to see the deeper truths of human behavior. For the spiritually awakened, this is the burden of consciousness. They are no longer able to ignore the unconscious dynamics at play. They feel the weight of society's collective shadows pressing in on them, and they realize that to engage with society at large requires betraying their own consciousness. This is where the necessary withdrawal comes in. The exhaustion of psychological labor. Jung discovered that one of the most exhausting aspects of living in an unconscious society is what he termed psychological labor. This labor is the invisible work that an awakened individual must do just to maintain their consciousness in the face of collective unconsciousness. Every interaction, whether in a workplace, family gathering, or social setting, becomes a psychological battle. The awakened person must constantly filter out unconscious projections, maintain boundaries to protect their own energy, and translate their deeper understanding into surface-level terms to avoid conflict or alienation. This is not an easy task. It requires tremendous psychological energy to maintain one's consciousness in environments that are predominantly unconscious. In these spaces, the individual is constantly exposed to projections, repressions, and psychological dynamics that are invisible to others but painfully obvious to them. The stress of constantly having to adjust their own frequency to match the unconscious currents of the environment can lead to emotional exhaustion, burnout, and even physical illness. Jung observed this phenomenon in his patients. Those who had reached higher levels of psychological consciousness often developed chronic fatigue, depression, and mysterious illnesses, not because they were suffering from personal pathology, but because of the mental and emotional toll of maintaining their consciousness while surrounded by unconsciousness. It was a form of psychic depletion, a weariness from constantly filtering out the noise and distortion of society. For many awakened individuals, the solution is not more therapy or self-help practices. It is to remove themselves from the environments that drain them. Jung's analysis of one of his patients, a teacher who had gone through years of inner work and spiritual awakening, illustrates this point. The woman had developed severe chronic fatigue despite no apparent physical cause. Through their work together, it became clear that she was expending vast amounts of energy simply by maintaining her consciousness in a school setting where unconscious projections and repressed material ran rampant. Once she withdrew from the school and moved to a quieter, more peaceful environment, her energy returned, not because she was resting, but because she no longer had to engage in the exhausting work of maintaining her consciousness against the collective unconsciousness. The energetic incompatibility of the awakened and the unconscious. As an individual becomes more conscious, they not only experience a shift in their thoughts and beliefs, but also in their energetic sensitivity. This heightened awareness makes it harder to tolerate the unconscious material that others project. The awakened individual begins to feel the energetic incompatibility between themselves and those around them. Unconscious projections feel like psychological violence, not because the individual is judging others, but because their energy is vibrating at a different frequency. Jung himself noted that after his individuation process, being in crowds became nearly unbearable. It wasn't that he disliked people, it was that he could feel the unconscious material swirling around him. The projections, repressions, and shadows creating a psychological storm that only he seemed aware of. This made everyday social interactions exhausting. For the spiritually awakened, being in such environments can feel like swimming against a current, trying to hold on to one's truth while the collective tide rushes in the opposite direction. This energetic incompatibility is why spiritually awakened individuals often withdraw from social media first. Social media is a 24/7 projection machine, a constant barrage of unconscious material. Every post, every comment, and every interaction on these platforms is charged with collective shadow material, outrage, fear, and judgment. For someone who has integrated their own shadow and become conscious of the psychological games at play, engaging with social media can feel like being trapped in a hall of mirrors, watching people project their darkness onto others while refusing to confront their own. In the next section, we will delve deeper into the concept of the hermit phase, the necessity of solitude for the spiritually awakened, and how this withdrawal leads to the development of greater wisdom and insight that will eventually benefit society. As the spiritually awakened continue their journey of individuation, their temporary withdrawal from society is not an act of escape, but of necessity. In this phase, often referred to as the hermit phase, the individual retreats from the collective unconscious to integrate their deeper consciousness, to make sense of what they have seen, and to process the psychological burden that society's projections have placed upon them. This period of solitude is essential for their growth, allowing them the space to develop the wisdom and insights that can only emerge through introspection and quiet reflection. However, the hermit phase is not permanent. Jung emphasized that this period of withdrawal is not a rejection of society, but a preparation for a future return. The spiritually awakened are not abandoning the collective, but rather working on something that society is not yet ready for. This time of solitude allows them to distill the knowledge and experiences they've gained into wisdom that can later benefit others. They are not disappearing forever. They are gestating, evolving, and preparing to bring their insights back into the world when the time is right. When the awakened return to society, they do so not to reintegrate into the mainstream, but to offer their gifts to those who are ready to receive them. Their return is not an attempt to rejoin the collective unconsciousness they once left behind. Rather, it is to contribute in ways that are more aligned with their true self. Jung believed that the return of the awakened individuals is like a return to the margins, where they can share their insights in spaces that allow for authenticity rather than conformity. This return is not about going back to the roles and personas that society demands. The awakened person, having experienced the depth of their own consciousness, cannot return to the shallow waters of collective performance. Instead, they create new spaces for deeper engagement, whether through art, teaching, healing, or writing. They work with small groups, offering guidance to those on similar journeys of awakening, or they create alternative structures that nurture authenticity and depth. Jung observed that once a person has truly individuated, once they have reached their authentic self, they can no longer be confined by the boundaries of social roles. Their return is a quiet revolution, one that seeks to bring depth, authenticity, and consciousness to spaces that need it most. In this way, their disappearance is not an abandonment, but a vital phase in their contribution to the evolution of society. The journey of the spiritually awakened individual, from withdrawal to reintegration, illustrates the transformative power of consciousness. It shows that the true work of the awakened is not to conform, but to evolve. And when they return not as ordinary participants in society, but as beacons of a new consciousness, guiding others toward awakening and transformation. Feeling the pull to go deeper into the path of spiritual awakening? Hit subscribe and join us on this transformative journey. Each week, we dive into insights that help you navigate the complexities of consciousness and growth. Drop a comment below, tell us where you are in your own awakening, or share any thoughts that sparked during the video. Let's build a space for open dialogue and mutual exploration. Your voice matters, and we can't wait to hear it.